God, what was it? A figure tall and gaunt, endeavouring from the outside to unclasp the window. I saw it, that flash of lightning.
One of the things that I was thinking of when I was going through your book and then thinking about classes that I've taught on French Impressionism and modernity and, the urbanness of it and the way that like the narrative, and I'm thinking of something like Varney, that I have to say it's just such a wild. I mean, Joyce is doing something different, right? But Varney is kind of taking what you might think of as a conventional narrative as far as you can go with digressions and with interpolated narratives. And I mean, it's a really structurally subversive text, even though it's really entertaining. And so I'm thinking, like, is this like proto-modernism or whatever? But anyway, I guess I'm just thinking about, what's kind of modern about this? What is these saying about modern life? And what are these saying about urban life? Whether it's possibilities, whether it's anxieties, whatever.
I think that's a really good question. So Varney in particular seems to be a text in which Rymer was figuring out what his style and audience and tactics was while he was writing. So he starts out with this really lurid, violent, kind of sexually grotesque beginning that seriously objectifies the heroine, and it looks like something straight out of Fuseli's The Nightmare. And then he kind of rolls that back and he doesn't really write in that register anymore, and he changes it, and it becomes more about this social comedy of the neighbors aren't sure if the neighbor is a vampire, and people are scheming over property, and the vampire eventually begins scheming about both property acquisition and marriage. And what I argue he was doing is that was the precise point when his publisher, Lloyd, was developing what Lloyd called the domestic romance. And this had existed before Lloyd, but Lloyd used the word as advertising very often, this a domestic romance, that a domestic romance. If you look for the words domestic romance and WorldCat, you see a lot of Lloyd very early. And a lot of critics think that domestic romance had just existed as a genre. I've seen a lot of modern critics of romance novels talk about the 19th century domestic romance or the 1840s domestic romance as if that's a thing, and we just assume it was a thing. But Lloyd seems to have crystallized it with a word that could be used for advertising. And once again, this is about telling women readers that they're included and telling family readers that they're included because they're going to read the romance. And what the romance was, is it was an adventure genre. And this goes back to 18th century theoretical writings like Clara Reeves's about what romance is. That romance is, you've got a naive character. It's usually a man. He goes on an adventure. He gets into dangerous spaces and meets dangerous people and sort of grows up and comes home and is reassumed into society in a way that reestablishes a status quo. That's a romance. And a domestic romance for Lloyd seems to have been domestic in two senses. Usually it took place in the United Kingdom. So it doesn't take place in some far-flung place. Like when Robert Southey was a 17-year-old student at the Westminster School, he wrote romances that took place during the Crusades, because that was very escapist, and he goes to the Middle East with his characters in the armchair. That is not, there's some of Rymer's stories take place in other spaces and countries, often if they're adapted from plays, but he really excelled at romances that took place in Britain, or even like in the syndexical London of the String of Pearls, and that people could recognize and could locate themselves in. Varney doesn't take place in London, but it does take place in England, and there's this frisson of danger of the vampire could be here in England. And they're also domestic in that they're family romances. They're not just about the hero comes home and gets together with one other person. It's about the recomposition of a family in danger. So in Varney, Charles Holland, who is courting Flora Bannerworth, is in trouble because Flora may have been victimized by a vampire, and her incompetent family is on the warpath about that. And they also have some very dangerous secrets, family secrets, which are why they have a vampire next door in the first place. And the action really takes off when Charles's uncle, Admiral Bell, who is at sea, but is retired on half pay, finds out from his lawyer that his nephew is in trouble with this woman who might be a vampire, or might have been visited by a vampire, which is, of course, subtextually is about various kinds of sexual taboo. And so Admiral Bell and his trusty midshipman companion partner, whoever he is, Jack Pringle, very, very typical, staged melodrama tar, go to land, to investigate. And land is a very weird and scary place for them. They hate the landlubbers. They explain that over and over again. They don't understand the conventions of land. When they see they're supposed to meet the lawyer at a pub called the Nelson's Arms, and they're very confused. How can it be called the Nelson's Arms when Nelson only had one arm? And this is about land is just this weird exotic space that they don't understand, but that they have to navigate in order to rescue Charles, rescue Flora, and put their family back together. And they succeed in doing this. And there's even a scene where we're told that they helped in the planning of the wedding, and Charles changed his name so that they would all look like one family. And I think that's like that's just a wonderfully radical statement about families and what the end of romance ought to be, from 1840s England. And when you get to that recomposition, which is not the end of the book because it's serial, and then the vampire tries to marry all of these women, and Bell and Pringle go to stop him, and we kind of forget about the original Innemorati and the original problem. That still, ultimately, this is a domestic romance, because of that recomposition of Charles and Flora and the Admiral and his friend's family, being the objective. And then later in the 1860s, Rymer is still writing about families when he's supposedly writing about crime and adventure. So a great example is his series about Captain Felix Heron, the highwayman, 18th century highwayman, kind of like Jack Sheppard, and his wife. Well, she's his in love with her, and then she's his wife, Edith Heron. And on the surface, this is about outlaws, that he's got outlaws in the woods, like Robin Hood. They function very much like a labor union, which is makes sense given that this is the 1860s, for again that urban working audience that's interested in political reform. But it's also about marriage. It's how does Captain Felix Heron manage having an outlaw crew in the woods, and also a wife, and eventually a baby, and a household. And they have a lot of discussions about what it means to be a good husband, wife, father, mother. Rymer comes up with very reactionary answers to most of those questions. He's pretty insistent that wives should not keep secrets from their husbands, and should defend their husbands no matter what. And there's the biggest test of Edith's faithfulness is when her brother turns up as this kind of enemy of her husband, and she has to figure out what to do and how much to tell him. And he insists that she has to, she has to trust him, and they can't have any secrets. So at that point, people are reading sensation novels again. Some sensation fiction is in cheap family penny periodicals. And the sensation novels are saying there are all these problems with gender and with the way that marriage and parenthood are working in this century. And Rymer is pushing back against that with these stories about outlaw men and the very traditional women who prop them up and keep them alive. And that's his response to the kind of proto-feminist revolution of the sensation novel.